Okay. Hello, and thank you all for joining us for this continuing education webinar. I'm Aziza Belcher-Platt, the Education and Training Representative for APA's Division 49. So on behalf of Division 49 CE Committee and all of Division 49, we welcome you to this CE webinar. It is my honor to introduce Dr. Sheri Bauman. She is a professor emerita of counseling at the University of Arizona. Prior to becoming a faculty member, she worked in K-12 schools for 30 years as a teacher and school counselor. She is the author, editor of, or co-author of 11 books, numerous book chapters, and over 75 publications in peer-reviewed journals and many publications in non-scholarly outlets. She is a former editor of the Journal for Specialists in Group Work. She is passionate about student well-being and social justice and works to support students who struggle academically, personally, or socially. It's also my honor to introduce Dr. Sam Steen, who is a licensed professional school counselor, director of the Diversity Research Action Consortium, and division director for CFCE within CEHD, specializes in school counseling, group work, and cultivating Black students' academic identity development. Dr. Steen was a school counselor for 10 years, and these practitioner experiences shape his research agenda, approach to teaching, and service. He's currently on the faculty at George Mason University and serving as the academic program coordinator. Two objectives guide his scholarship. One, to further develop creative and culturally sustaining school-based counseling interventions that improve student achievement, including the Achieving Success Everyday Group Model, ASC, designed to promote social, emotional, and academic development for students of color. And two, to explore issues related to the training and preparation of pre-service counselors and school counselors in the local, regional, and national community. Dr. Steen is a fellow for the Association for Specialists in Group Work, a division of the American Counseling Association. Dr. Steen is also the recipient of the Al Dye Research Award and the Professional Advancement Award, both from ASGW, recognizing his outstanding efforts advancing the field of group work through research and development, and the Counselors for Social Justice Advocacy of the Year Award through CSJ, a division of ACA. Recently, Dr. Steen is serving as a principal investigator on a major project that is awarded by the National Science Foundation, which aims to advance programs, knowledge, and skills targeting Black male middle school students for better accessibility and higher likelihood for success in Algebra 1 and future STEM-related careers. These two group counseling juggernauts have a 2012 video series, Group Counseling with Children, a multicultural approach, which includes a recording of 6 live unscripted counseling sessions with a group of 5th graders. So without further ado, Drs. Bauman and Steve.
I just have to say, Sam, after listening to your bio, I feel like a slacker. So, in any case, the title slide should be up there. Can you see it?
Well, yeah, I think we see both a slide and also the note slide. So is there a way to switch the screen so it's
There
just
should
one
be. Let
slide
me
at a
figure it
time?
out. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you hit one of those display settings at the top. Up to the left. You see how it says
Yeah,
in
I'm seeing
slideshow? Yeah. I think it's always
swap presenter and slide.
see
This
what
is
happens. Is that
got it.
better? Yeah, there you go. So we titled this group counseling, groups for children and adolescents exploring race and culture and other developmental considerations. And what you don't know is that Sheri and we were able to present something like this in 2009. So we had a PowerPoint from 2009 that Sheri dug up from her toolbox. And we looked at it and like, wow, some of the stuff applies, but some of it doesn't really apply in the same way. And so hopefully you might be able to tell like, hey, is this something that you presented in 2009 or is this something that's new? And so as we go through this, we just look forward to the journey that lies ahead. You can hit the next slide, Sheri. I don't think I can drive.
Okay.
So you saw these outcomes when you signed up potentially. Right here, I was thinking that we would spend most of the time on the facilitation piece, right? There's developmental considerations. We'll skim through that. There's some therapeutic factors that you're familiar with adults that is emerging in the research for young people. You know, we're starting to look at that and see does it really apply. But for the sake of today's conversation, primarily we want to talk through things related to the facilitation piece because we know that that's what people are most excited about is actually how do you do this work?
Next slide.
Sure, yeah. So, Sheri, as we start, right, when you can go to the next slide. As we start, when you think about children and adolescents or any aspect related to that, you can click the next slide. I would say what comes up for you when you're thinking about student development or youngsters.
I think Piaget, which is something most people have to study more than once in their education, is to keep in mind, for example, pre-operational kids, the kindergartners in the preschool. And I have some colleagues who do groups with that age group, but it has to be very visual, very hands-on. We can't anticipate that they're going to have a lot of insight about things or they know how to communicate with each other. And then as they develop, you're going to see today in some of our videos that we have a 5th grade group and an 8th grade group. And the 5th grade group, we're very concrete in the way we explain things. We make it relevant to things they know, like ice cream. And as we get to the teens, which are 8th graders, it's much more fluid and they're able to talk about abstractions and so forth. So this is just a brief refresher so that you can keep that in mind. Preschool, I have to tell you, I have so much admiration for people who could do groups with these little kids. I just think they're cute, and that's as far as it goes. But, they need to learn what emotions are and what causes emotions. And a big one, I think, for little guys is to understand what someone else is feeling. They're still very egocentric. But if you plan well, you get them to practice some new skills and perhaps push the envelope a little bit. This is I really still love our 5th grade group, Sam. They learn about feelings. They develop greater impulse control. They don't just burst out, well, they do, but we try to help them tone that down and really work on the empathy for others. For that age, you want to base things on activities and interactions. It's not realistic for them to just reflect on a topic or bring things up on their own. So that's the relevance here. For adolescents, in some ways, their groups are with adolescents are like groups with adults. They're able to express things a little more clearly. And we know, though, that depending on what stage of adolescence, there definitely can be intense feelings. They feel one thing one minute, they're laughing, and then they're crying, and then they have to struggle with the ambivalence and ambiguity of the world because they're beginning to understand that things are no longer black and white, they're very gray. So they also learn, and I think it's valuable. I'm not the only one who's had this happen, or I'm not the only one who feels this way. And hopefully we want them to transfer their skills from the group into their real life.
And so,
So
I'm gonna pause you there because actually, as you're saying these things, Piaget, there's some other theoretical frameworks, or I guess you say theorists, that we would draw upon over the years that we've been sort of continually using to explain this development. And then you're shifting from children to like adolescents, how there's some overlap with adults, but they still are, youthful and young in their mind and immature in some ways. I pause you there. You don't have to go back to the slide, but I pause you there to just say, okay, Sheri, that's right. But what about in the context of, because we're talking about developmental considerations, but race and culture? And does this still really apply in that way? Our teachers, are we still seeing these kids through the lens of Piaget and this is how they're doing when I think about technology. I think about the access to the information that they have now. I think about the social political climate that we're living in. How does that impact these typical in our Erickson? We used to have Erickson as a slide, remember? Like that still exists. I can still see it, but there's these other pressures or these other factors that impact these student development. Any reaction to that? Because we use groups to kind of help with that, but any reaction to what I'm posing as a question in this moment?
if I understand correctly what you're saying, Sam, I think the internet and social media has made such an impact on development that some of these theories don't take into account.
Mm-hmm.
Someone needs to modernize them. and I saw the slide on my screen, it's adolescents, and I can't resist. This is totally random.
Is it
So I
not
have this
spelled
card
properly
on
or
my
is it?
desk, and it says on the front, it says, maturity is a phrase, adolescence is forever. And that describes me completely. So shall we?
So you're saying technology, yes, social media, yes. Our theoretical framework that we're using as examples aren't accounting for these other pieces. Was Piaget talking about Black and brown children, Hispanic children, queer children? That's what I'm asking. And
Yes, I agree with you that
I'm
they
not
need to.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the general concepts are there, but we need to take into account how those innovations originally, and now they've become part of the lifestyle
Mm-hmm.
of everyone, not just kids.
Mm-hmm.
One, there's online groups, for example. Let's say you have kids who live in a really remote area and couldn't, or the school is so small, you couldn't put together a group or a special group like for queer kids.
Mm-hmm.
But with the internet, you can bring them together from wide geographic areas. So there's
Mm-hmm.
just lots of things, and ambivalence and ambiguity. I feel that every day when I turn on my computer,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, and
Mm-hmm.
anger. We won't go there.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Thanks. So you were at the slide around implications, right?
right.
Mm-hmm.
So for little guys, play. And if you haven't had training in play therapy, it's really helpful, and it doesn't have to be a whole course. But that's the, what's the word I'm looking for? That's the focus or the
Mm-hmm.
medium for working with little kids in groups. But by the time you get to elementary, there are activities that you plan, but there are also times when you throw your activities out the door because
Mm-hmm.
something emerges in the group that's much more important. But my view on that is always have the activity and make sure it's relevant and so forth, but be prepared to dump it. And you have to be flexible because things never go as planned. Adolescents, like adults, can have some activities, but the goal has to be clear that it's to hear the voices of the participants and help them relate to each other. So
Mm-hmm.
again, you have to be flexible and read the room, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, Sam, you want to do
Okay,
this?
so this one was one of our goals and objectives for today was to review these samples of research. And this is an example, also another example where the research only goes up to 2018. Well, we're still working on research between 2018 and 2024, but it's not reflected in these next slides. These are samples. And so we'll put together a reference list. Dr. Plot will send it out. And so I'm just kind of confessing that this is a portion of just some samples. So let's just see the next few slides, click through them, Sheri. So I tried to do this in,
Ooh,
it's okay if you took them out. Did you take them out?
I didn't think so.
It's okay. So what I tried to do was like chronologically point out some articles that are exploring race and culture, right? So I say race and culture intentionally. When you think about like culture or cultural implications, that's more encompassing. When you add race, it's more anxiety provoking. But in therapy, we want to be intentional about it and like who's responsible for that. And I also want to make it clear that we're not talking about all the therapists are white and all the students or the youngsters you're working with are black and brown. We encourage the therapists to do their own work around their own racial identity development, exploration of their culture, and then they'll be more open to the exploration of race and culture with their youngsters. So that's real critical. So some of these examples of research that you'll get via email, right? Talk about therapists who are two female therapists in Baltimore County, Maryland, working with black females around certain things, and because they had done their racial work, their identity work, they were more accessible to working with these students in particular. And so that was something that was early on. These same two facilitators worked with the LGBTQ, at the time we weren't calling it the LGBTQ plus IA, um, sort of group, but but nonetheless, they were kind of early on exploring issues around a non-gender conforming identity, which I think again was really helpful because they had done some of their work. Then there's examples about therapists working with Hispanic youth and the Latinx, which we might call Latinx now. So like these things keep ebbing and flowing, and the whole point was just to say there's not a ton of research, right? Within one journal, a school counseling journal, there were 45 articles. Only 17 of them were on group counseling for youth, even in a school counseling journal. And so that was like roughly like 8% or 18%. It wasn't a lot of percentage towards this population. So we wanted to provide that as a resource for you if you're curious about that. So that's where that's going. And there's just several examples in there, but we can move on to sort of the core of what we wanted to talk about today.
So I'm going to talk about these things. And at one point, let me see if I can do it. You can still see the screen, right?
Correct.
Okay, so I need to get up where is it? Okay, here they are.
Yeah.
Okay, let me go back to the other screen. We were on screen 10. So these are things that
You can maybe show it. It would say like, well, it's kind of small. We can't see it as well. So it
yeah,
would be like
I need to say,
from current slide. Thank you, Sheri.
so screening and selection is really critical. And I think in schools, it's hard sometimes for teachers to understand that not every kid is appropriate for a group experience. They may be too immature. They may be too impulsive. They may not have good communication skills. They may wiggle and jump around and it might distract the other kids. And particularly what I've found over the years when I worked with kids is that teachers wanted a very disturbed child to join a group so we could fix them. And A, we don't fix. And B, a very disturbed child is not likely to function well in a group. And I've had to kick myself more than once when I caved and took the student and it really scared the other kids. They would say to themselves, but sometimes later, am I like that? Is this a group of kids like that? I don't want to be like that, and so forth. So screening and selection is important. You also want to inform the kids about the purpose of the group and talk about risk as a expectation when you're in a group.
So when I think about when you say screening selection, you gave an example of if you're in a school setting, right? But all these students that will work, all these kids that we might be working with, they're not necessarily in a school setting as well, right? So yes, sometimes the teacher impacts who either is selected or who we want in there, but outside of that space, you may recruit or advertise, and it's still important, like it would be with adults, that you give these youngsters a heads up about what the expectations are in there so they're not frustrated. But then developmentally speaking, you can tell a 13-year-old, okay, we're gonna have a conversation. It's a support group. We're bringing kids together because we're maybe you're a new immigrant or you're recently moved to this country, and so we'll have conversations about that. But if a kid is 6, it might be harder to have that conversation, like you're going to come here and we're going to have conversations or do activities or things with play around these topics, but we still should do it even though it may be complicated and or not necessarily easily understood by them. It would be unethical not to give them a heads up, not to be intentional about having those conversations. So I wanted to add that, Sheri, as you were going through this.
And keep in mind, we did not do the screening. The school counselor who recommended the kids did that, and we had to rely on her judgment, and we did. The other thing is we had an information session where we did tell them, but this is the very first session, a very brief clip where we're trying to help the kids understand what's going to happen.
Right. So you had that, pause it,
And
Sheri.
we're going to have a chance to learn something about
You have to
ourselves,
pause it.
other, and about culture.
I'm sorry, what?
Pause it. Can you hear me? Or so I said
I can hear
pause it.
you.
Yeah, so we didn't screen them, but they were screened and prepared. This is I want to remind you, this is 2000 and we did 2 videos. So is it 2009, Sheri,
I think
right?
so, which is
Right. So
scary.
2009, we didn't just bring kids together and say, hey, we're going to talk about race and culture. It didn't happen. Sheri had former master students in her program that she reached out to them, and these are their children. And from these schools, the counselors vetted them and said, hey, you're going to meet with, folks and do this. Would you be interested? And they were interested. The night before I came to Tucson, you had an information session with the students and gave them a heads up. Hey, we're going to go through these activities. We're going to have conversations around these topics. What do you think might happen? Are you interested in doing it? So I just want to be clear, that was very intentional because we don't want to do more harm than good. And so now you can show the screen, but you might want to, can we see it? I guess I can see it. Is that how it's supposed to show? I thought it would show the full screen, Sheri, if you did it the same
Oh,
way.
I've got the screens backwards. That's why.
Okay, so just make it from that current slide and see if that works.
I did, but I have to move this over there. Just a minute.
In this group.
That's why Sheri's
And we're
driving.
going
She
to
has
have a
more
chance to
technology
learn
skills than me.
Okay. What if I minimize this and move this over?
You're all right?
I beg your pardon?
I didn't say anything. Keep going.
Job happens, so I didn't want you to not fail just in case I ever do get a call.
Okay, from current slide. What are you seeing? Are you still seeing the small one?
Yeah.
You know what, to save time, it's short and I'll try to.
Click it and
be a
see.
little-
I mean, we'll try. Yeah, I just didn't know if that's how it's supposed to show up.
Okay, so remember, this is within 5 minutes of, sitting down.
In this group. And we're going to have a chance to learn something about ourselves and about each other and about cultures and so forth. Because, anybody here like ice cream? Okay, I kind of thought so. Me too. So how would it be if ice cream was only vanilla? Boring. And how would it be if there was only one song in the whole world? Okay, so when there are lots of different choices and lots of different kinds of ice cream or songs or people, things get more interesting and more exciting. That's what this group is about, to learn to appreciate all those differences. Okay, so we're going to begin because you guys know each other pretty well and you know your names, but Sam and I kind of need a little help in this group. And we're
Okay, so it repeated it. Yeah. Okay, so that's the opening, right? We're just giving them a heads up, and notice that it's discussion still. There's no activity. There's no tangible things. They were fifth graders, so we thought, well, we can communicate to them verbally, and the real basic and simple example you gave, Sheri, elicited a lot of reaction to it, like, hey, how do you feel about ice cream? But I suspect there are other clips that will then have them responding to some of these things that we were prompting them around.
But as we talked about development, they need things concrete. If we talked in the abstract about, cultural differences, and I think in some ways we should have done a little more, but it wouldn't have made any sense to them. So informing them about the group risk, they have to understand that there'll be some times when they'll be uncomfortable. And what we did, it was sort of a shooting from the hip moment. Right before we started the group, we took a large piece of paper and made a big circle. And then I got in the middle and said, here's where my comfort zone is. I'm not taking any risks. I like it here. I'm used to it. And then I stepped over to the, a little further to the edge and so forth. And then we talked about, you don't want to step over the edge because you can get hurt. Like driving a car into a crevasse or something. But they responded to that to the point that each time we did an activity, they would say, "Can we move them now? Please get our circle out," because they wanted to show I took a risk, or this was scary for me. And that was, again, more concrete than using words. It was very visual, and they liked it. Planning is, of course, important for any group, but when you're working with young people and doing activities, you really need to get your props and handouts or tools, whatever you're going to use, ready so that you don't waste time and don't distract things by scrambling to find your paper or your book or whatever you're using. And flexibility, as we've said, is necessary in any group. Anybody who does groups knows that. But particularly with kids, we tend to, and one of the things about groups in school is kids tend to raise their hands. They don't understand this process at all. And as you're instructing them, you may have to be a little flexible about what you do or not do. You may have to throw your activity out the window because there's something that emerges that's much more powerful.
And I think that's where Sheri and I we laugh about our leadership style even, right? We planned a ton because the structure was necessary to have the game plan, the goals and objectives were clear, and then the activities that we would use were clear. But then in those moments, the flexibility you're talking about with adults, we expect that, we know that, but some people still, kind of shy away from that, going with what's going on in that moment. And with kids, they tend to live more in a here and now moment. And so the flexibility and the openness to that is even more critical because we have been caught off guard every time we do these groups that you're seeing in these videos. But even in the work that we're doing now, it's just endless where you're expecting something and it doesn't matter how much planning or structure you provide, it is always going to go sideways, but that's okay because we're expecting to be flexible in those spaces.
And just to add, what's obvious is that the activity is a vehicle for developing some understanding, some insight, some new ways of expressing emotions, but it's not the goal. So that if you need to toss it, then you do.
And Sheri, you gave the example of the circle and the comfort zone.
Right.
And we had this great idea and we started doing it. But remember, the way we interpreted it and the way they operationalized it, it wasn't the same. And it didn't even matter. You
Right.
remember that? Where they were like,
Oh,
hey,
yeah.
we want to do this. And so what I'm saying is the activity is the vehicle, not the goal. But even if your activity is supposed to elicit a greater understanding around friendship issues or their identity, and they don't get that, but they get something else, that is quite all right.
Yeah. I'm going to show a video a little bit later of this same group, and you will notice one little boy is very wiggly and rocking in his chair and scooting around. And it's tempting, especially for me, because I'm, as Sam describes me, anal, to say, sit
I
still.
never said you were anal.
To tell him to sit still or, stay in your chair, do this or do that. It's very interesting to read the room. None of the kids were the least bit bothered by it. In fact, I'm not sure they noticed it. And so I shut up. And this isn't the place. If we present like teachers, they're going to expect it to be one way coming from us to them. We also, you'll see Sam doing this. It's very cute. Kids tend to talk to the facilitator. I really liked what Sam said. And then we typically say, Sam is right here. Can you tell him? To help them improve the ability to share with peers what's going on for them. And being intentional about the issues of diversity and culture. So often that's the elephant in the room, and we need to make it part of the interaction at all times. I'm looking for, again, my video clip. This one I'm going to show you is just a bit, it's still in the first session, and later on, we asked them after they did a name game to introduce themselves as including their race or ethnicity as part of their identity. And Sam modeled it and added the idea that they were to share something that they're proud of or that they value about this identity. And to me, this section is very sad and says to me why this work is needed.
Black, my dad is from Louisiana and my mom is from Pittsburgh.
Anything that makes you something good about being, you said mixed, right? Something good about being mixed. I think you can got it. Let us know if you know something.
My name is Deji. I'm African American, and my dad and my mom are from Long Beach, California, and I'm from here.
What's good about being African American?
I don't know.
Can't think of anything yet? Okay.
Well, maybe ask everyone today to do something. Okay?
So was that difficult, like I said, it was?
Yeah, it's sort of
What was hard about it?
figuring out it.
What you like about it? What made it difficult? What else made it difficult? Nothing else? Had you ever thought about how you describe yourself before?
No, not really.
Not really.
So that's why.
That's part of the reason maybe. But it was really helpful, and I think you all did a great job.
Because sometimes when we start school, we had to do the same thing. And some people get nervous about it, so. Black, my dad is from Louisiana.
So
It's
Sheri,
interesting.
yeah, so you kind of gave a spoiler alert of like, hey, it's sad to hear that. And when I'm hearing it, the only thing that's going on for me right now is that this is, again, 2009 versus 2024. How might I ask that prompt? The way I modeled for them, it was very narrowly focused in like, what is something good about being a person of color? Or maybe let me backtrack. When I modeled for them, I said, hi, my name is Sam. You can call me Sam. And I identify as Black. I didn't even say African American, right? Like that part is consistent. And then because we get to choose, right? But then I said something that I really enjoy or like about being Black is like Black culture, Black music, Black food, soul food and different things like that. So I modeled for them that prompt. But then as they're going, we're asking what is something good about being this? And to me, that's like too narrowly focused on the topic. Like what comes to mind when you think about being Black or being a person who identifies as Jewish? What was your first or earliest recollection of when did you learn or remember or notice that you were this particular identity? I think I would do that a lot differently in this day and age.
As I watch these videos, I can think of a ton of things we could have done differently, but in some ways, this is a realistic presentation. You don't always do it perfectly. Something interesting that we talked about.
But what I'm saying is in 2009, it didn't stand out to me. That's what I'm saying. It didn't stand out. It's not like the skill wasn't, that's not, the fact that we were even bringing them to the table to have this conversation was commendable. I'm saying that exponentially with the information out there and the savvy and the sort of the social media or their stages of development, or the fact that before we used to say, oh, a kid notices their skin color when they're this age. And I have a 3-year-old that has noticed skin color earlier than the other. It used to be 4 or 5, and he's like 2.5. That's all. That's what I'm saying. Do you have any reaction to that? You see where I'm going with that? Not just the skill, but just the context even.
I think that's would be a very big challenge to address these kinds of issues in the current socio-political climate. You need to get parent consent to have the child participate, and it needs to be informed consent. So if you ask for permission to include a child in a group about diversity or about different cultures, you're going to have a hand-picked group of families typically who are more supportive of those kinds of activities than those who would prefer those not ever be mentioned.
Sam and Sheri, can I just let you know, and I appreciate you, Rebecca, for putting this in the chat. There's a comment that it's helpful to hear that you might have approached things differently today. And I was curious, like, just off the riff, what are some things you might have done differently, Sam? Like, how would you say it?
Well, I started with sort of that modeling of not limiting it to these binary options. What's good or bad about being Black or African American? Their responses is not the reason why I'm saying that. The group was still early. We could have said, what's your favorite color? And they might have been hesitant to share their favorite color. That's the stage of the group. But from the facilitation consideration, right, like being intentional about the way we ask these questions, I'm able to see it a little clearer now because of the own work I've been doing. It's sort of what I'm saying. So I can't really tell you exactly what to say, but just know that there's got to be a broadening to the way we either, there's a word I'm thinking for, define these ideas, these identities. They change so rapidly. You see where I'm going with that? So that's really what I'm trying to express is like, what might I've done differently? Broaden the questioning, give several self-disclosures or examples. Draw Sheri in. Sheri, how do you introduce yourself and what might you say? So those are just some things right off the cuff.
Which you did. A couple of things I would like to add to that. Right before we asked them to define their cultural heritage, they were struggling, all of them, even the three eventually who came up with something. Sam said, well, think about your parents' background as a way to help. And of course, they all mentioned the cities where their parents were born. They didn't associate that with a cultural background. It was also interesting. Sam, described himself as Black, and Darjay described herself as African American. And we talked about that the labels don't tell you much unless you know the person. And that avoids, making assumptions and stereotypical conclusions about kids.
We
But it was interesting.
also we also reflected on this, Sheri, and thank you for jogging my memory because at the end we heard from the young woman who identified as mixed and the young woman who identified as African American. It was 2 out of the 6. There was another person of color, I think it was Gage, who identifies as South Korean or American, South Korean and the other parts American. And so in this day and age, he might be a brown child, right? We sometimes say Black and brown children. And so I hope that's not offensive. I'm just saying the other 3 identified as white, and they said something about their culture. They were able to say something that they thought was good about being this particular culture. And so just that discrepancy, what in our society is causing Darjay to be hesitant about saying something positive about being African American?
I just want to correct one thing. Ileana was one of the 3 we didn't see, and she identified as Mexican American and said the good thing about that is that we have a very rich history.
Oh yeah, I remember. You're right.
I'm very proud of that. So she was really the only one who got it in the sense that we intended, but as Sam said, and I agree, it's how we tried to elicit that from them, and it didn't wanted it to go. Going ahead, we talked about a lot of that. Creating a safe environment goes along with risk taking, that you invite risks at the appropriate distance from that comfort zone, that you don't push people ever. And it doesn't show up, I don't think, in any of the clips, but we don't say you have a right to pass, but they do. Sometimes you say, Sam would say, well, you know what, if you can't think of anything now, we'll give you a chance later on, or we will come back to this. So they know that the invitation is there, but they're not put on a spot and increase their anxiety about the whole experience. And Sam has just been talking about the kind of questions we ask. We need
Mhm.
to allow room for them to bring in concepts that we didn't think of, but were
Mhm.
actually more important. So in terms of modeling, Sam started this activity by modeling. I did some, we would invite each other, but the question in any therapeutic situation is the same. How much do you self-disclose? And why are you doing it? For whose benefit? Is this so that you can vent or that you can draw attention to yourself? Or is it to model and show the children that this is a way we can talk about things?
You know, I'll add then in that one, there's two bullets, and sorry if this is like backtracking. One is like we're creating a safe environment, but we're also encouraging a brave space because this risk is embedded in there. So yes, it's meant to be safe, but can you really make this space safe when we're engaging in conversations that are beyond like things that are typically safe or comfortable? So we shifted by saying in the screening, where you might be taking some risk, we might ask you to take some risk, and so then in the session, we're encouraging like be brave, take a risk, or try push beyond what you might normally say because we're all here or in this together. So that's point number one. And then the modeling and self-disclosure. So yes, it's similar to like this work we do with adults. You want to know why and for what purpose, but I want to be real clear. If I'm working with a group with all women, then the modeling and self-disclosure that I do is really strategic by acknowledging the the my privilege around gender, or I'm reacting in this moment because I'm a man or a black man. And with the kids, I think it's the same thing. It's like this modeling and or self-disclosure is very intentional. And so it's like it's like almost like permission to do that because the students or the kids benefit from seeing that. We do have to watch the transference and the counter transference, but this idea of modeling and or self-disclosing is like I would say I'm arguing, I encourage that, especially around these topics, is what I'm saying. Oh, you identify in this way. I'm not familiar with that in any way, and there's no pressure for you to teach me that, but I just want to let you know that we appreciate your acknowledgement of that, but that's something that's new for me. These are things that I might literally say that I would probably dance around a little bit differently with adults, put a little more ownership on them.
With the kids too, we had to decide whether or not we would participate in the activities. And sometimes it was for modeling purposes. We realized these kinds of things were new to the students, and by participating ourselves, we gave one example, and we had to make that clear of how to do this. And other times we bring our own diversity into the mix and demonstrate that that's important to us too. And I joke, Sam and I met 100 years ago over the phone, and we had many conversations before we met in person. And here I had no clue that Sam was a young black man. I thought he was a man. I didn't know. And he thought I was a woman, and my guess is it was easier to guess that I was going to be white, but not old. So we mention these things in the group because they're safe for us. I can say things that are safe. I don't want to become tearful as the facilitator rather than as a member. So processing is important again because the activity is not the goal. It's learning about oneself and others and cultures. So some of your questioning has to lead to them applying this understanding. What does this mean that I couldn't think of this? Or what does it mean that turned out to be a leader in this activity? Those kinds of things. And then help them, particularly towards the end of a life of a group, so you learn these things about yourself and others and cultures. How are you going to apply those in your classroom, in your community, in your family to help them make that transition? Because just like the activity isn't the goal, the group isn't the goal. It's taking those experiences elsewhere. And some of the kids who were pretty quiet in the group might have towards the end, and there were several cases, started to disclose more. And then they realized I can do this. And it was, nobody judged me. Nobody, criticized me. And then what I'm going to end up doing, Sam, is switching slide packs and show the videos.
Yeah,
'cause we
let's do
have a lot of
that.
time.
While you all
Because-
do that, there's a question in the chat.
Sheri, you go ahead and I'll try to respond to the question. So Aziza, sum it up for us.
Okay. The need for parent consent for discussing DEI issues in groups, given the current social political landscape. Is that true for non-research practice, like social and emotional learning groups, where the main focus isn't DEI? And so Z is saying that basically it's so prevalent in the news, and that they've had a 6-year-old who brought up school shootings. And so how do we talk to adolescents about these things, and how much permission, I guess, do we need? And hopefully ZI.
Yeah, I mean, so if you talk, so Sheri, you're finding the next clip.
Yeah.
Okay, so when I hear that, Sheri and I might not be on the same page about this. So I've worked in schools where the principal was the authoritarian, or whatever that term would be. And they're like, when these kids come to this school, we're responsible for them. So we have consent forms that are like opting out. So we tell people what they're going to be doing, and parents can opt out. And if we don't hear from them, it's a green light. And then others are more conservative and concerned about these issues, right? And so they're like, everybody has to sign these forms. But the truth is, we know that everything that goes on in the school, I have children, whether I want to know what's going on or not, I'm not privy to everything that goes on. So there is a risk in there. The research or non-research piece of it is not the critical piece, because if it's research oriented, there's all kinds of consent you have to have. If the non-research piece is typically what's happening in these spaces, we weren't collecting necessarily data for research purposes in these examples. And so you want to give people a heads up about what you're doing, but you can't guarantee everything that comes out. And that it's really critical to some of those ground rules and norms that you're creating, where confidentiality is important. But parents or teachers are going to want to know, hey, what were you talking about in those spaces? And so in my mind, we give them enough information to reinforce, to encourage, to open the door for the dialogue, because a lot of mental health issues come up in school spaces or with children and adolescents. We identify them early on, but we're not the only ones responsible for addressing those concerns. And you better believe that just like kids are having higher acuity, more stress and anxiety in these spaces, so are the teachers, so are the parents. We've all experienced much of this trauma post-COVID. And so that's my reaction to it, is like, yeah, the kids, they are going to bring it up, and you can't guard or protect them from everything. And so you kind of have to be real strategic and savvy about how you approach it with an openness.
I want to point out that I live and work in Arizona. So that says everything, right? You don't, SEL has been banned from the schools, so you have to call it other things. I've had parents call me and say, my student is in your group and I'm in a custody case. So I would like you to tell me everything she said in the group about her mother. So I point that out in the letter very clearly. If there is anything that involves the safety of your child, physically, emotionally, or psychologically, I am bound by law to report that and contact you. Otherwise, it's very important for the life of the group to feel safe that they can share things without the risk of being exposed to people or parents outside the group. Usually I can get away with that, but the schools here, I could go on for days, are really very restricted. So let me show you this one. Watch Gage wiggle.
Try to start it from the beginning. Looks like it's halfway. Never mind. That's just the bottom. I apologize.
Okay, so we had done an activity and I couldn't find a short enough clip. You've seen things done like it, but actually I'll show you. So we gave them styrofoam balls, which talk about discipline. They were throwing and dropping and all of that. But then we gave them toothpicks And I read this horrible script of, have you ever been teased or called names about your weight? And if your answer is yes, you stick a toothpick showing a wound to yourself. And it got, we used race as well and ethnicity as well. And I used all the horrible terms that there are. And then at the end, because they all said they were feeling bad, this was hurtful, this was difficult. Although at the very end of the group, they all referred to that session as the best session, interestingly. But to get to some processing, Sam suggested that we do compliments. Each student was to give a compliment to someone else and pay attention to Oleg. He's the boy on Sam's right. And during that exchange, particularly the part about race, I said the N-word and he giggled. And Alex, the half black, half white mixed child, said, "That's not funny, Oleg." But you couldn't even barely hear it. So it's interesting how Oleg answers his compliment prompt. It worked out very well for him.
I mean, all of us had to feel pretty safe to take the risk. So you guys.
Oh,
What happened?
well, I screwed up. I'm going to just play it from here. I'm sorry. Or can I do it here? I think I can do it here, but never mind.
I mean, all of us had to feel pretty safe to take the risk. So you guys did a great job.
Well, we want to, since, we did that and it was kind of challenging, we want to try the compliments again so that we can all leave on a positive note. So one person starts and you say the person's name. I want to give a compliment to whoever, and then you give the compliment, and then they can.
Yeah, let's try looking at them and saying it right to
So
them.
whoever wants to start.
Roger?
Let me give it to. Actually,
I love that.
actually, all the exit.
Oh, we should explain that part.
Hold on. We can't hear it.
Express their feelings. Thank you.
Sheri, can you hear it on your side?
Stuff like that, adding new.
This doesn't have the captions and I don't know why.
Yeah, no. It's saying I can't hear it, but I mean, I wonder, is it this one embedded in this video?
Good things kind of help, and you anticipated that we were gonna not just leave early, but.
That's as loud as it goes. Watch how Sam handles this. It's masterful.
There's Roman, Oleg, Oleg. Thank you. Okay. So we get her.
No, what I'm saying, Sheri, is in the other PowerPoint, do you think it sounds better or will it sound the same? Because when we went through this, we could hear it. We can't hear it at all.
Okay, yeah, the sound is bad and I have a version with the captions. It
Yeah,
drives me
show
nuts that I do this, but I can tell you that Sam says, let's help Gage. Gage, you pick out someone that you'd like to compliment and we'll give you hints and so forth. And he ends up complimenting Roman and so forth. And then what's meaningful about this exchange is that Oleg had been giggling, remember, and called out for it. So he chooses Darje to compliment and says, I compliment Darjay because she didn't laugh like I did, and I didn't know it was wrong, but now I do, something like that. So he demonstrated that he'd been thinking about that since that exchange. And first of all, he's born in Russia, so he's bilingual. And secondly, some of the terms I used were not familiar to him. And so he was giggling out of nervousness, which they didn't get. So
What if I tried to show it on my screen? I know we're running out of time, but Aziz, you would have to give me permission. Let's just see.
this one,
Yeah, because I
Sam,
think
You're co-host, so if you should be able to share.
I'll try. And Sherry, if it doesn't look right, then just let me know. So let's just try.
okay, and I want to show the 8th grade group, and so
Well,
people
we'll
can
go back to you. This will stop the other screen sharing. Do you want to continue? So let's just try it. And so I'm going to put this here, see if I can put the volume there, share sound, optimize, share. You see this one, correct?
right.
And then if I put from current slide, you see that, correct? You still
Yeah,
see it?
yeah.
No.
I mean, all of us had to feel pretty safe to take the risks. So you guys did a great job.
Well, we want to, since, we did that and it was kind of challenging, we want to try the compliments again so that we can all leave on a positive note. So one person starts and you say the person's name. I want to give a compliment to whoever, and then you give the compliment, and then they pick someone else.
Let's try looking at them and saying it right to them.
So whoever wants to start can start.
Darjay?
I want to give it to Alex again because she actually.
Say you.
What?
Say you, actually.
You actually told what your feeling was and how you can fix it. I want to give a compliment to Ileana because you expressed your feelings. Thank you. I want to give a compliment to Sheri because you took off your hurtful comments and stuff like that out of you.
Thanks.
And you told why.
Thank you. Gage, I want to compliment you because you kind of early on thought about good things kind of help, and you anticipated that we were going to not just leave everybody all wounded. So thank you for that.
There's Roman, Oleg, or me. I think. Or Darjay. She goes, we get her last because you started. Don't worry, we won't forget.
Think of it.
Pick somebody first, and then we'll help you come up with one.
Roman because
Anybody have ideas about Roman?
A hint for Gage to tell Roman?
Go ahead, Alex. Alex has a hint for you, Gage.
because he told us like some ways to get over your anger.
You want to look at Roman and tell him that?
You because you told you actually were giving ideas and stuff.
Yeah. I want to give a compliment to Sam because he seems like a strong person that can handle a lot of things, like anger or something different, and he seems really nice.
Thank you. It feels really good to hear you say that. is it Oleg? I want to give a compliment to Oleg. Oleg, you were very thoughtful when you responded. Like, you listen and you think for a long time, and then you share your feelings. And I think that's really helpful for us to hear.
Listen to him.
I want to give this to Dorji because she didn't laugh. You didn't laugh like me. And I thought some of the words were funny, but then I realized it wasn't.
What do you say?
Thank you.
It's really good to hear that too. Wow.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, so we have a few more videos. If I have to share them on this side, Sheri, I will. But so what is
Okay,
your
you go up to the one that says name, the prompt that says name, and then right under it, it's Talia's
okay.
sharing her card.
Yeah. So that was helpful to share that because then now the things you were saying, they make more sense. Should I jump into the next one, Sheri?
Yeah, just one little piece, you know, we had them put the toothpicks in their styrofoam balls representing all the hurts. And then we said, can anybody think of ways to soften that hurt or remove that hurt? And they came up with all sorts of wonderful things like tell an adult, but speak up, even if it's not me, if I see someone doing that. So that was an add-on because we didn't want to leave them with that raw emotions. This was a early on name activity for the 8th graders. And this is one girl's response. So if you go right under that one, Sam.
Let me share the screen again, make sure I get the right screen. And so first, this is the activity, you know.
Yeah, okay, there it is. That's what
Yeah,
they
so-
had to respond to. And then let's watch the video due to time.
Who's gonna go next?
Me?
Okay,
Okay.
Lindsay, thank you.
So, people that inspire me or things, books inspire me, like a lot. They help me dream.
You have a favorite one?
No. And my drama teacher, Miss Kresmer, she inspires me. She's like, I don't know, she's like really fun to be around. And Vincent Van Gogh, he inspires me because he's like an artist and I'm an artist, so like, I don't know, yeah. And then my mom inspires me, of course. And then I'm really good at art and math. I'm really good at math. And reading and memorizing things. It's really easy. And I could tell you anything you want to know about Harry Potter. And I'm good at cursive. And I want to be really successful when I'm older. Like, I want to have a nice house and nice kids. And I want to go to college at the U of A, like first at the U of A and then somewhere else. Like, I want to get a doctor's degree, a PhD, yeah. And then I want to do something like to change the world. I don't know, like to write a book and like it changes like Harry Potter, like that, yeah. And oh yeah, J.K. Rowling, she inspired me too. And then I have a lot of fun at school. It's like a place that I love. And Oregon, I was born in Oregon, so like I have
Sam,
I
maybe
still
you
have
can
friends
stop
there
at this point.
that I still talk to, and at Allah's house too.
I wanted to point out how adolescent she is. I just want to change the world. You know, these grand aspirations and hopes. And she's one of the few I still know. She did graduate from college. I don't know if she started graduate school yet, but she was dynamite. If you noticed when she was talking, I mentioned, oh yeah, my mom inspires me. She paused for a minute because she mentioned her mom in an earlier session and burst into tears. So we didn't, when we asked her, what would you like us to do if you lose control or start to cry? And she said, just go on. So she didn't want any soothing or so forth.
Well, let me jump in there. We probably going to show at least one more. So I'm circling back to, well, this conversation is race and culture and other developmental considerations. So we get this adolescence version. And I don't recall the prompt. You saw the name, and in this corner put this, and this corner put this. If we were to do this in the 2024 and the exploration is race and culture, we might add these aspects of intersection of identity in the prompting. And we even reflected later on that these groups, both of them, they didn't remain centered on sort of what our goals and objectives were, which is exploring race and culture. We drew them to the conversation, and they would sometimes back away from that. Is that okay? Absolutely. Because the goal is not about like what we're trying to accomplish. It's sort of co-created with what is needed for them. But could we have been more intentional about it? Yes. And this is an example where if you were to tease a little bit more about, well, when you hear J.K. Rowling and you know she's an author who happens to be a woman, what is that like for you as a young woman who aspires to one day change the world through your writing? So that comes up for me, Sheri, as I'm watching this video
Right.
and thinking
Yeah, every
about the
time I watch
topic.
this, I think you missed another one. But often it comes around. Can we just show the other 8th grade group
It's
one?
the one right below it, correct? So let me
Right.
share the screen because
Yes.
it might skip a step sometimes. So share screen, this one. And then it's going to be from this slide and it's from this current slide. Okay.
Who's gonna go next?
Me.
Okay.
Okay.
That's the same one, correct?
Go to the one under doesn't, it looks like I'm wearing a red top.
Yeah, that's the one. Okay, so I got it now. Let me share the screen again. From this current slide. Okay.
Maybe I get sometimes at school people make rude comments like racial
She's the only
stereotypes.
Black person in the group.
Other
Stuff like that.
students, you mean?
Yes. I get angry.
Directly to you, or you overhear them?
Sometimes they'll talk behind my back, and I'll hear it, and then I'll like ask them later, what was that about? Or sometimes they'll say it to me.
Do you mind giving an example?
Like at lunch, they would make fun of me, and they like some of the kids, like not my friends, they get a piece of fried chicken and like give it to me or something.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Regarding food in this case.
Yeah.
Anybody have a feeling that they want to share regarding what they just heard Justin say, or reaction? What comes to mind when you hear him say that?
Bullying.
You see that as maybe a form of bullying?
And it interests me, like they bully me and stuff, but I really don't care.
You said it interests you.
Yeah, because as big as I am, it feels weird that they come up and bully me like little kids. Not like little kids, but kids that are my age.
Yeah, but they're not even bigger than you, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
So Alejandro, you see it as a form of bullying, and Justin, you're saying it interests you that they're intrigued about your race. Is that what you're saying?
Not so much that, but they'll like mess with me in that way.
Oh, I see.
Like to kind of taunt me or something. And yeah, I have a little tolerance for that stuff.
Usually when kids do that at my school, I usually stand up for the other person because it angers me when they bully them for no reason. So, I hate it.
Is it similar to Justin or anything?
Just anything, because there's a kid who tripped a special ed kid on purpose, and I got in an argument with him.
But you're doing the right thing to understand.
I was gonna say, that takes a little bit, I always say to be an upstander instead of just a bystander. But that's bias-based. bullying, and that's really.
At school, for example, there's a kid in 6th grade, and we got into an argument at lunch, and then in class, he came up to me, and he told me to shut up, and then he said the N-word. I got into a fight with him.
Really? 6th grade?
Yeah, like even at that young age, people act like that, and I'm like, well, why would you say that? Yeah, I just got upset. Yeah.
Tyler got a comment.
Kids in our school think they're all bad because they're like a certain type of race. Like my school, we have a lot of Hispanic people and white people, and the Hispanic people think they're cooler than the white people. And they just talk and they just like pick on the white people.
Thanks. So that was him talking about the racism he experienced in his school. I want to point out something that came a little later from this. The boy that was on the right in the red shirt on our screen, in one of the prompts that he was responding to, could you show the thing right above? No, never mind. It's right below. Number 5 slide.
Okay. Okay. So it says, yeah. Hold on a second. That's the wrong screen. Screen 2. Okay. From the current slide. So this.
Discussion prompt, they each filled them in. And again, you could see we got a little bit afield, but the boy, Tyler, the boy in the red shirt, confessed really is how it felt. The lower right-hand corner, a time when I witnessed discrimination and did not intervene. And he described a time that he was in the hallway and some kids were taunting a Black kid in his school. And he was obviously very conflicted. He talked about they were way bigger than me and there were a lot of them and there was just me and I didn't like what was going on, but I didn't do anything. And we really talked about his bravery to share that with the group. And I wanted to make sure that came through. So I think we're out of time.
Yeah, if I'll summarize one other point, I think in our objectives had to do with therapeutic factors. And so, of course, we know therapeutic factors, right? That's not unusual in groups with adults, and we rely a lot on Yalom initially sort of establishing those over time and kind of stayed centered on those. And so my colleagues and I wanted to look and find out what therapeutic factors might show up for young kids. Is it the same ones? And Sheckman and Gluck, I think, on one of our slides, we'll send these out to you, had been studying it unbeknownst to me and kind of came up with cohesion and interpersonal learning were the primary ones for youngsters. We started digging a little deeper to find programs or interventions ran with kids, and then that were tied to academic outcomes because that it would get published. And in there found that it wasn't just those two. They were the main ones, but they were other therapeutic factors that were emerging in these spaces, inconsistently reported in the findings, but that we could glean from that. And so it just made me encourage that we're not just settling for like, oh, these are the therapeutic factors that work for adults and they automatically work for kids. And then now I push myself and us even forward a little bit more. When you're engaging in this work, we're looking for therapeutic factors. Do they show up the same way for kids? What about race and culture? Are there other ways to describe the positive or the influence or the impact that's occurring in that space that might not be limited to what Yalom said all these years ago around therapeutic factors? So I hope that's not confusing, but I wanted to make sure that we did add that to the conversation.
So I know that Sam, you have a stopping point. So before we let you go, I just want to say for those who are attending live, I invite you to use the reaction buttons or to unmute so that they can hear our experience of applause and appreciation. Sheri's going to be able to stay for a few minutes for some Q&A. So
I'll stay a few minutes. But yeah, if you're okay with that, is that the time now, Aziza, for the Q&A?
It's 12:15, so
That's great.
yeah.
I'll send a note. Okay.
There is a question in the chat. Would you have any comments regarding the pros and cons on the teaching of critical race theory in the schools?
I love that question.
First of all, critical race theory is not designed for K-12 schools. As we talk about developmental, intellectual and psychological development, that's not the audience. This was a program that's rightly discussed in higher ed to understand the complexities of our society. I would tell you, again, my experience currently is in Arizona, that there's legislation that does not permit you to teach not only critical race theory, but anything that remotely sounds like it might be that.
Well, I'm glad I stayed
But
because I'm glad you can't hear me. I'm glad I stayed here because I would sort of argue that's the wrong word. I would never argue with you, Sheri, but I would
as I would
offer
win.
I would offer that yes, in Arizona, I used to work in Arizona. So would I call it critical race theory or not? Is it being co-mingled with social emotional learning? And the answer is absolutely. But when you say yes, it started in the law field and or higher ed, but we're also talking about educational systems that are drawn upon or connected, when you think about race in that respect. So to explore the impact of race on educational systems in elementary, middle, and high school, it's a real thing because the
I
kids are
agree.
already reflecting. You heard in 2009, the kid with the Washington hat say, I'm in a school that's primarily Hispanic and they're teasing the white kids. Right. And so race is a factor in that discussion. So when I hear critical race theory, I don't see it as I know it's a social political thing. I don't see it as problematic. I see it as, oh, the extent to which I use race as something to critique or to explore how it impacts my family, the way I live or work, the school my child goes to. I think it's a thing. And to help kids have language around it, we don't have to call it critical race theory,
That's the
but
thing. Yeah.
exploring race and culture and the impact that you feel or have in this space. How comfortable is it in this space if you identify in this way? To me, that's critical race theory. It's like exploring these things and critiquing them to see ways to make it safer or more comfortable so that the environment is inclusive. So those are my comments, pros and cons, not necessarily that, but more how to use it in a way that doesn't come across as argumentative or trying to prove a socio-political point. It's not about that. The kids are engaged. The kids they can see. They experience these environments and they're steeped in, these sort of long-standing traditions that we've had.
I do agree with you, Sam. I just, again,
Wow, surprise.
Thank you, David, for that question. Anyone else want to quickly unmute or put something in the chat? Please feel free.
You mentioned Piaget, and I was with another, I'm with 49 now, arts division, arts psychological division, psychology division, some years back, and there were some graduate students being taught by profs that came on the listserv. And I mentioned Piaget, and surprisingly, he's a giant. They said they didn't even cover him. Just wondering what's going on at some of the institutes of higher learning. I know we did here up in Canada. It was always revered. I'm delighted you mentioned him.
and we could have mentioned more, but it just gives us a big picture to think about. It's just like not every kid goes through every stage in order and at the same age, but it does show that our cognitive skills develop over time. And I have to tell you a funny story. Justin's dad, when he was in my human development class, and we talked about Piaget and conservation and stuff. And he said, well, my kid is going to be able to do it now, even though he's only 5. I don't remember what the glass thing, water in the glass. And I said, boy, that's really amazing. And he came back the next week and he said, he couldn't do it. And I said, because he's normal, because
Regular.
at age, it's something. And then, within a year, he could do it, but he was testing the waters to see if this theory made any sense with his own kid. And he was sure that Justin was going to was so advanced and so forth, but
we all do. Yeah,
yeah,
of course,
right.
our children. Well,
Anyway.
listen, there's a question there. I don't know if Victoria or who wrote the question? Oh, Z. So it says, do you think psychologists, counselors, therapists should be doing more affinity groups with youngsters? And Sheri, I'll start, and then some of it's based on the research. So I told you we have samples of research up to 2018. From 2018, and there were affinity groups embedded in there, but we didn't call them that. And so unbeknownst to me, when we started studying affinity groups based on some research we were doing, affinity groups have been run outside of counseling for years, right? In the business spaces and other professions, social work and so on and so forth. So when you say, do you think, the word is they probably are and they should be. Affinity groups, depending on how you define them, which was also convoluted in the literature, we tend to think COVID, racial unrest, affinity groups bring people together to explore, these issues. Okay, fine. But affinity groups, we started finding out, is like in school settings, counselors were shying away from some of those things. So they might have a fishing club. So kids who like to fish, they come. So that's an affinity group. So affinity groups tend to be more flexible and more inclusive. And so you can have an affinity over any topic. It doesn't have to only be race, is what I'm trying to say. And so yes, they should occur more often, but you don't have to limit it to these sort of narrowly focused identities, because again, the students, I think, are a little more flexible if we give them the opportunity to be able to, in that time that they spend together, will they come to some affinity around certain topics? So I don't know if that's confusing you. Like, hey, we have affinity groups for Black children or Black queer children. Okay, fine. We have affinity groups for youth who are in middle school. And so they're in middle school and they're in there and they're across a racial spectrum. And the conversation that they have will then show these therapeutic factors and these connections that are having. So I would say yes, have them with children and adolescents, but don't limit the definition to what you're using as a considered affinity.
Any other questions or comments? Someone had to leave, Rebecca, but she said she had watched some of your videos in her groups class, so it's really interesting to hear you all reflect on it today. I cannot thank you enough, and so we'll stop here on behalf of Division 49. Thank you again for attending. Thank you all for coming and presenting. I put some links in the chat, but I'm actually going to send them out via email to those who registered. So if you're looking for assessment or if you'd like to give us some feedback, that will be fantastic. And you'll get an opportunity to do that. And again, thank you so much, Sheri and Sam, for doing this.
This is the first Sheri and Sam show for a while. It was fun to
Yes, it was my pleasure, and I will commit to those references and a version of the PowerPoint, Aziza, that you can share with our colleagues.
Okay.
All right. Thank you all.
Everyone have a great rest of your day.
Good to see you, Sheri.
Bye.